Hello and welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly Hot Topics educational webinar series. I'm Shannon Montoya and I'd like to just give you a few things before we get started. These calls are recorded to listen to again at your availability on the nanp.org website. This includes upcoming webinar schedules, and go to the continuing education link to get a copy of the recordings. You can also earn one continuing education credit for participating in Scoop webinars and taking the corresponding quiz found in the membership area of our website. I'd also like to invite you to share your hot educational topic with NANP. Are you doing great work in clinical research and applications? NANP wants to highlight all that speaks to our nutrition professional community, so email me, Shannon, at nanp.org. Today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so feel free to type in your questions throughout the webinar so we can get to as many as possible. So let's get started with our guest. Laura Adler is an environmental toxins expert and educator who helps health practitioners to better understand the links between environmental chemicals and their impact on disease states, from weight gain and diabetes to thyroid disease and infertility, so they can better support their clients and patients. Laura's students also include healthy-minded consumers who are proactive about protecting themselves and their family's health and well-being. Laura takes a practical, real-world approach to dealing with toxins that is informative, accessible, actionable, and free from overwhelm. Thank you for joining us today, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me. I love NANP and the sort of community that you guys have, so I'm happy to come in and teach for you guys.
Great.
So I will just dive in if that's okay, and hopefully, people listening who are live have questions and as we go through. So I love chatting about this stuff, and I'm happy to do that at the end. So I think probably for the most part, everybody is at least somewhat aware of environmental chemicals. The topic of toxins in our environment and ultimately our bodies is actually getting a lot more attention these days. Obviously, we have big issues like Flint, Michigan, that sort of galvanized people's attention back into specific health issues. But generally speaking, people aren't aware of the low levels of exposures that we're getting every day. And as people are working to optimize their health, as well as facing more complex chronic health issues, they're starting to look beyond the just basic food and lifestyle modifications, and they're kind of starting to question maybe chemicals are part of that. And as we'll explore in this class, the chemicals that we are exposed to through normal everyday activities are increasingly being linked to metabolic disorders that can result in weight gain, diabetes, and obesity. Now, in addition to that, as if that wasn't bad enough, but in addition to that, these chemicals that we're exposed to every day are also strongly linked to a long list of other chronic health issues, autoimmune issues, infertility, heart disease, cancers, neurodegenerative issues like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADHD, autism, allergies, gut dysbiosis, you name it, there is some environmental toxins effect that's active within that condition. So I want to do just a super short overview of what we're going to talk about today so that you know what we're going to touch on. We're going to talk about what toxins are and actually what they are not. We're going to talk about the landscape of chemicals in commerce, meaning what's the scale of this problem. We're going to look at some current stats on overweight and obesity. Now, obviously, as nutritionists, I think this is a topic that you guys all fully understand and are likely seeing in your practices, but really having an overview of the scale of the problem really is important and puts the whole thing into perspective. We're of course going to talk about what obesogenic chemicals are and how they contribute to metabolic disorders. We're going to touch on what experts are saying about this connection. What are the most common obesogens that we're all exposed to? We're going to talk a little bit about detoxification and what actually happens to the toxins inside us when we lose weight. And lastly, I'll kind of point you in the direction of how you can continue to build your understanding of environmental toxins, as Shannon said in the beginning, so that you can better support the clients and patients that you see. So that's a lot, and we'll just go right into it. So as nutritionists working, or whatever other modality you practice in addition to being a nutritionist, working on lifestyle modifications, etc., it's increasingly becoming essential to be able to dialogue with clients and patients in an informed manner, not only about what chemicals to be mindful of, but how to make changes in their daily lives with the goal of reducing exposures linked to chronic disease. That's our ultimate goal. Let's reduce exposures when we can. Now, I've been teaching about environmental chemicals for going on 7 years now, and I can tell you that consumers now are becoming far more savvy and more curious about whether chemicals might be part of what's happening for them, what's keeping them stuck in chronic illness, than it was, just 7-8 years ago. It was a lot less awareness of this issue then. So overall, my intention is to help you become more informed, to provide you with the tools to take this subject into your audience, into the sessions that you have with clients, and to do so in a way that's engaging and empowering rather than overwhelming. I'm sure a lot of you have had experience with this toxins conversation in a way that's preachy or finger waggy or sort of doomsday scenario, and I don't think that's an appropriate way to position this conversation. We want to position it in a way that's empowering. And the more fluent you are in these issues, the better you'll be able to support the clients and patients who come to you for help. So I actually believe, and I'm not the only one that believes this, that environmental chemicals are the biggest missing piece of the conversation around health and wellness. I think over the next few years, we're going to see the spotlight on this issue continue to get bigger and bigger. So in order for us to understand where the topic of chemicals and weight gain and insulin resistance and diabetes comes in, it's helpful to kind of back up and get a snapshot of the current landscape of the chemicals that we're exposed to. Now, first off, when most people, and you guys are definitely not most people here, but most people are your clients. So when most people hear the phrase toxin or toxic chemical, they often assume that exposure to one of these requires a trip to the emergency room or a phone call to poison control. The assumption is that if something is toxic, it's acutely toxic, meaning it's going to cause an acute or severe reaction immediately, like skin blistering, headache, nausea, vomiting, etc. And in fact, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, a common response to hearing about chemicals in consumer products and their, quote, toxicity is, well, if this stuff was so toxic, why aren't we all dropping dead or pouring into emergency rooms around the country? So that's sort of the rebuttal that we often hear. While acute symptoms of toxic chemical exposure do indeed happen, they're not what we're talking about here. So we are not talking about occupational exposures to chemicals or kids getting into cleaning products under the sink or anything like that. What we're talking about are the chronic low levels of exposure to chemicals in our environment, meaning in our personal environment, that are happening every single day. And in the context of these types of exposures, some people will certainly have some acute symptoms like headaches, migraines, or rashes, asthma attacks even, but for the most part, the effects of exposure to environmental chemicals are far more subtle and far less immediate. In some cases, effects from exposure to chemicals may not manifest in overt symptoms, but rather a long list of small and seemingly unrelated things like your weight creeping up, maybe thinning hair due to a thyroid condition, the onset of endometriosis, or a worsening of asthma. So right out of the gate, we got to squash the thinking that all toxic chemicals will send us to the emergency room. This is certainly true for some types of exposures, but generally not the low levels that we're getting every day. And I just say this at the beginning of this talk because this is something that in talking to your clients and patients, you might have an objection come up around this. So being able to position it that way or frame it that way for them can really help them understand how toxic exposures to everyday chemicals affect us differently. So the other thing is that we need to be aware of is that not all chemicals are bad. In conversations around environmental health, we often have naysayers and people who push back by snidely remarking that everything is a chemical, water is a chemical, oh, don't be afraid of, dihydrogen monoxide, which is water. And they're right, everything is a chemical. Air is a chemical, water is a chemical, hormones in our bodies are chemicals. So what we are focusing on in the environmental health world are not all chemicals, but the chemicals that may or that do cause harm to humans, animals, and the ecosystem. Now, in the United States, there's approximately 84,000 chemicals registered for use in commerce. Not all of these are actively being used. Amazingly, the federal government doesn't actually know how many are actively being used. We just know how many are registered. Due to weak federal policy regulating chemicals, specifically our Toxic Substances Control Act passed in 1976, not updated for a full 40 years, so this was updated in 2016 for the first time, the vast majority of these 84,000 chemicals have never been assessed for safety, and there was no legal requirement for them to be tested. So as I just said, not all chemicals are bad. Many, of course, have benefited us, new medicines, building materials, things that have made our lives easier, better, safer, and even longer. But the more closely that we look at many of these chemicals, the more we're finding that they are indeed harmful and that they can indeed hurt us in very significant ways. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention routinely tests for and measures chemicals in the U.S. population through their National Biomonitoring Program, and to date has found more than 300 environmental chemicals or their metabolites in urine, blood, serum, excuse me, and breast milk, from pesticides and heavy metals to nonstick chemicals to flame retardants, jet fuel, plastics, like you name it. In 2009, the Environmental Working Group tested the umbilical cord blood of 10 babies for toxic chemicals and found more than 280 pollutants, including 180 carcinogens, 217 neurotoxins, and 208 reproductive toxins. So what this illustrates is that the chemicals in use are making their way from our environment and the products that we buy and use every day into our bodies, where many are proving to be harmful. Now, just because a chemical is measured inside us doesn't automatically mean that it's harmful, but when research is conducted, they're finding that just about all of them have the potential to hurt us in some way. And the reality is that we are all being exposed every single day through the water we drink, through the air that we breathe, through household cleaners, personal care products, our furniture, the carpets under our feet, the packaging that our food comes in, all of these things. Now, as health professionals, especially you guys who are boots on the ground, meaning you're in the trenches with people, helping them to make lifestyle changes that guide them towards better health, I really believe that you are perfectly positioned to help people address these everyday exposures in ways that conventional health professionals often can't, and for a few reasons. And as an aside, this is actually why my business is really targeted primarily towards health professionals, because I feel like if I can teach you guys and you guys can all take it out to the masses in a much bigger way than I could as one person. So the first reason why I really do believe that you guys are perfectly positioned to be having these types of conversations is that most medical professionals don't actually have an adequate education in environmental health. Now, all of us in the nutrition realm often get pretty miffed when we learn that the average medical doctor only receives on average 19 hours of nutrition training during their entire academic career, despite the fact that, as we know, diet, and especially poor diet, is at the root of most disease and illness. When it comes to environmental health, the picture is actually a little bit more bleak. A 1996 study found that medical doctors on average receive approximately 7 hours of training in environmental health, only 7. A 2016 article titled Environmental Chemical Assessment in Clinical Practice, Unveiling the Elephant in the Room, published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, stated that while clinicians must deal with the consequences of environmental chemical exposures, there is widespread agreement that clinicians lack adequate information and training with respect to environmental risks and health. So this is my jam. This is what I'm trying to fix at the best way that I can. So the second reason that I think you guys, as boots on the ground people, are better positioned to have this is, as we know, the conventional medical model doesn't allow for enough time with individual patients to actually talk to them about lifestyle stuff. Average office visit is 9 to 20 minutes long, just not enough time to help people make the kind of changes. And this is why I'm so passionate that lifestyle practitioners like nutritionists and health coaches and naturopathic physicians, because their model allows for this deeper work. And the third reason is simply because regardless of your niche or focus or area of expertise, most, if not all of your clients or patients will be dealing with some kind of weight issue, maybe not quite like these gentlemen on the slide here, but pretty much everybody is dealing with some kind of weight issue. So having another tool in the tool belt to address that, I think, is really important. In 2014, based on the most current research, it was revealed that there are 2.1 billion people around the world that are overweight or obese. That's nearly 30% of the entire world population. According to the CDC, 36.5% of adults in the US now medically qualify as obese. Among people who are middle-aged, it's just over 40%. So 40% of middle-aged people in the US are overweight. These are all sharp increases. The rate of obesity 50 years ago was only 13%. Since the 1970s, rates of childhood obesity have more than tripled, and CDC data shows that 1 in 5 school-aged children in the US is currently obese. So right now, nearly 70% of our entire population in the US is either overweight or obese, and they're struggling with all of those corresponding health issues on a scale that just didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago. This is partly why this is really considered to be an epidemic. According to the CDC, more than 30 million Americans have diabetes, and another 84 million, or 34%, are living with pre-diabetes. And they state that if current trends continue, we're going to be seeing 1 in 3 Americans developing diabetes in their lifetimes. So this is why no matter what your modality is or your area of focus or anything like that, you'll inevitably encounter clients or patients that need help with their weight. Now, at a time when healthcare costs are a big issue for more and more Americans, we cannot ignore the medical cost and the burden on the healthcare system that are associated with these diseases. And I just think that we'll only do these slides for just a couple seconds, but I just think that framing it through this lens is really important. So currently, estimates for the costs, these costs range from $147 billion to nearly $210 billion annually. Medical costs associated with diabetes adds another $116 billion to the bill, and right now, more than 20% of healthcare spending is on diabetes alone. This was a shocker for me. Globally, the cost of diabetes alone is $825 billion. And as Shannon has posted, all the references for all of these are actually on a PDF that you guys can check out later. A study published in The Lancet found that if current trends continue, over 700 million adults worldwide would be affected by diabetes by 2025. So this is an enormous public health issue. Authors of a study published in The Lancet concluded, quote, because of the established health risks and substantial increases in prevalence, obesity has become a major global health challenge. Not only is obesity increasing, but no national success stories have been reported in the past 33 years. Urgent global action and leadership is needed to help countries more effectively intervene. Now, conventional thinking around weight management is always focused on diet and exercise. We know that that is only a partial piece of the puzzle. It's this calories in versus calories out model that really distills this complex issue of weight management into incredibly simple terms. You got to burn more calories than you take in. Except we know that this doesn't always work and that weight management is far more complex than that. So when we see rates of childhood obesity spike, kids as young as 1 or 2, we can't explain away their excess weight because they're eating too much and exercising too little. Now, because diet and exercise hasn't proven to be the solution, there is growing interest in what are called non-traditional risk factors, and I'm sure a lot of you guys fold some of these non-traditional risk factors into your work. So these include stress, micronutrients, the gut microbiome, which I think you guys, my guess is that you guys kind of knock it out of the park with that one, and of course, environmental chemicals. The White House Task Force on Childhood Obesity, the National Institute of Health, and the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases all recognize the need for increased research in the area of environmental chemical links to metabolic disease. Now, chemicals singled out for their role in triggering or contributing to metabolic disease are called obesogens, which is defined as any chemical that directly or indirectly increases obesity through the disruption of metabolic, hormonal, or developmental processes. Obesogens have the ability to alter fat cell development, alter metabolism, and promote fat retention. Now, this term was coined by Dr. Bruce Blumberg, professor of development and cell biology at UC Irvine in 2006, so it's a relatively new word and a relatively new field of research, although the idea that chemicals can alter metabolism in ways that lead to weight gain was actually kind of sparked a few years earlier in the early 2000s. An article in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives titled Obesogens, an Environmental Link to Obesity stated, many in the medical and exercise physiology communities remain wedded to poor diet and lack of exercise as the sole causes of obesity. However, researchers are gathering convincing evidence of chemical obesogens, dietary, pharmaceutical, and industrial compounds that may alter metabolic processes and predispose some people to gain weight. Now, while most in the health and wellness space have plenty of information and education on how to support people with healthy eating and appropriate exercise, I think we need to really bolster our understanding of this role that chemical obesogens play as well. Now, currently there are about 20, this is not all of them, but there are about 20 chemicals that have been identified as obesogens. These include things like organophosphate insecticides, organochlorine pesticides like DDT, brominated flame retardants, bisphenol A, and in addition, I don't know if there's been a tremendous amount of research here, but into the replacement chemicals like bisphenol S or bisphenol F, phthalates, heavy metals like arsenic, cadmium, and lead, atrazine, which is the most widely used herbicide in the United States, and that's also been found in almost 90% or around 90% of drinking water samples tested by the USDA. And more commonly known substances like nicotine, high fructose corn syrup, and MSG. So these are all substances that people are exposed to every single day through the foods that we eat, the water that we drink, the products we buy and use every day. And we're not just exposed to one, we can easily be exposed to more than half of the items on this list in a single afternoon, without question. So let's take a closer look at how some of these chemicals can contribute to weight issues. Now, overall, these are the recognized modes of action that obesogens can follow. They can increase the number of fat cells in the body. They can increase the size of fat cells. They can alter endocrine regulation of adipose tissue development. They can alter hormones regulating appetite, satiety, and even food preferences. They can alter basal metabolic rate, alter energy balance in favor of storing calories, and alter insulin sensitivity and fat metabolism in endocrine tissues. So let's take a look at a few of these. Most of these are working on one of two primary routes, through endocrine disruption and through activation of receptors in the body responsible for fat regulation. Now, as the World Health Organization puts it, we live in a world in which man-made chemicals have become part of everyday life. It is clear that some of these chemical pollutants can affect the endocrine hormonal system, and certain of these endocrine disruptors may also interfere with the developmental process of humans and wildlife species. Now, there are hundreds of chemicals used in commerce that have the ability to interfere with the normal functioning of the endocrine system. These are referred to as endocrine disrupting chemicals. These chemicals have the ability to block or mimic the role of natural hormones in the body. Now, while most of the research into endocrine disrupting chemicals has been done on animals, there's mounting evidence that humans are also being affected in similar ways. So this slide here is really just showing how endocrine disrupting chemicals, those little lime green guys, can slide into the parking space, so to speak, of our hormone receptors, blocking the ability of our natural hormones to slide into those slots, and also inappropriately firing those hormone receptors and signaling that results from that connection because they're sliding in, sneaking into those parking spots. So most obesogenic chemicals are also, well, actually, let me back up. So, well, no, I'll go there. So most obesogenic chemicals are also endocrine disrupting, and they can act as obesogens through this pathway. So not all obesogens are endocrine disruptors and act on that pathway, but the majority of them do. Now, as you likely already know, the endocrine system is a collection of glands, produces all the hormones that regulate metabolism, growth and development, tissue function, sexual function, reproduction, sleep, energy, mood, among pretty much all the things. And because our metabolism is regulated by the endocrine system, chemicals that interfere with normal signaling of hormones can lead to problems. So certain endocrine disrupting and obesogenic chemicals like bisphenol A have been found to correlate in humans with altered levels of leptin and ghrelin. These are the hormones that are responsible for regulating hunger and satiety. A 2006 study published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives showed that mice exposed to extremely low levels of bisphenol A, in fact, about 1,000-fold less than levels that the EPA has established as being the point at which there are no effects, altered blood glucose levels, and led to insulin resistance. The Endocrine Society's second scientific statement on endocrine disrupting chemicals, released in 2015, stated that EDCs can act as obesogens, diabetogens, and/or cardiovascular disruptors. For obesogenic effects, endocrine disrupting chemicals can act upon adipocytes and the brain to induce obesity, which generates insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, and dyslipidemia, and greatly increases the risk of the susceptibility to type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So that's endocrine disruption. I want to now move into PPAR activation, which is our master fat cell regulator. So in addition to endocrine disruption, number of obesogenic chemicals activate PPAR gamma. This is, like I just said, the master regulator of fat cell development in the body. Now, activation of this receptor can actually change the programming of fat cells. So if PPAR gets activated when a cell is in pre-development, it can change the outcome of that cell, turning it into a fat cell instead of, say, bone cells in the body. And this leads to an increase in the number of fat cells in the body, which on its own can steer people towards excess weight. And interestingly, it seems that when stem cells are activated by, or when PPAR is activated, stem cells tend to preferentially choose, I don't know if they're choosing it, but preferentially will move towards becoming fat cells specifically instead of bone cells. So there's just an interesting correlation there. When PPAR is activated, cells that are already fat cells will increase their capacity. Those fat cells will increase their capacity for fat storage, and they'll become physically larger. So activation of PPAR can result in larger quantity of fat cells and larger size of fat cells. Now, chemicals are typically either water soluble, which are ones that we pee out pretty readily, or they are fat soluble. Fat soluble chemicals are also referred to as lipophilic or fat loving, and they are attracted to and accumulate in adipose tissues and other fatty tissues in the body, including the brain. Now, the fact that these fat soluble chemicals are stored in the body's fat tissues is actually a brilliant defense mechanism employed by the body to keep these chemicals out of systemic circulation. However, this can also lead to this vicious cycle of weight gain. So this is a graphic that illustrates this from a 2017 study published in the journal Current Obesity Reports titled Endocrine Disruptors and Obesity. Study authors write, "It is noteworthy that many EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, are lipophilic, and POPs in particular, and POPs are persistent organic pollutants like DDT and dioxins, that POPs in particular are known to bioaccumulate in body fat over the years. It is therefore plausible that the link of obesity to disease relates not just simply to the deposition of fat, but to the increased retention of lipophilic pollutants in that greater volume of fat." So this graphic illustrates, quote, "this potential for a vicious spiral to be set up whereby obesogens act to increase the amount of fat stored, be it by increased cell volume or increased cell number, which would be followed by greater retention of lipophilic obesogens, and which would then lead onward in an increasing spiral of greater body fat and even more lipophilic pollutant retention. In this sense, obesogens may be self-fulfilling and be able to increase capacity for their own retention." Now, you can see that activation of PPAR and its resulting changes in fat cell number and size leading to weight gain has nothing to do with diet and exercise. This is literally weight gain happening on a cellular level. This is referred to as chemically induced weight gain. It has nothing to do with calories in or calories out. Now, while this concept that chemicals can make us fat might seem new to you, it's actually one that I'm pretty sure that we collectively have all known about for a very long time. So let me ask you this. Have you or anyone you've known been put on a pharmaceutical medication that has caused weight gain as a side effect? If you guys are in clinical practice, I'm sure that you have seen the tail end result of this. So most people can easily nod yes to this question. Prescription medications like clozapine used to treat schizophrenia is well known for causing weight gain. Antidepressants of all sorts, antipsychotics, and even really common medications like Prevacid and Nexium can trigger weight gain in people, sometimes leaving them struggling for years with weight that just won't come off. So someone can be healthy and normal weight, be put on some pharmaceutical, an antidepressant, let's say, and within months can start putting on weight. So these medications all activate PPAR gamma in the same way that these obesogenic chemicals do. It's the exact same mechanism of action. So what this shows us is that activation of PPAR can trigger weight gain at any point in our lives, at any point. Dr. Leo Tresand of New York University School of Medicine and a leading researcher in the environmental health space was quoted in a 2015 article in The Scientist as saying, "This is not to minimize diet and physical activity. They are still the leading causes of the obesity epidemic. It's just that increasingly we're finding that environmental exposures to chemicals may be an under-recognized third factor in the epidemic." Read the conclusions of the dozens and dozens of studies examining obesogenic chemicals, and they all voice the same thoughts. Here's one that says, "Although undoubtedly overeating coupled with lack of exercise is a major contributor to the rise in obesity, which can be resolved by reducing caloric intake or calorie intake and increased exercise, it may be that reduction in exposure to obesogenic endocrine disrupting chemicals, particularly during early life stages, could also contribute to reducing obesity in the population." Here's another one that says, "As growing evidence indicates that the exposure to EDCs might account for a relevant part of the incidence of obesity and related conditions, then stronger controls on EDCs could generate better health and significant financial savings each year for healthcare services." And probably most importantly, Bruce Blumberg, the man who coined the term obesogen, said this: "I would not want to say that obesogen exposure takes away free will or dooms you to be fat. However, it will change your metabolic set points for gaining weight. If you have more fat cells and propensity to make more fat cells, and if you eat the typical high carbohydrate, high fat diet we eat in the United States, you probably will get fat." In an article titled "Obesogens, an Environmental Link to Obesity," published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives, author Wendy Holtkamp writes, Bloomberg postulates that the effects of early life exposures are irreversible, and those people will fight a lifelong battle of the bulge. However, if such people reduce their exposure to obesogens, they will also reduce health effects that may arise from ongoing adult exposures. Bloomberg believes it's good to reduce exposure to all kinds of endocrine disrupting chemicals. Eat organic, filter water, minimize plastic in your life, he says. If there's no benefit and some degree of risk, why expose yourself and your family? So all of this brings us to the more important part of this class, which is understanding where these obesogenic chemicals are hiding out so that we can start taking these important steps towards reducing exposures, both for ourselves and for the clients or patients that we support. Now, the focus of my work is teaching what I call practical avoidance, how in real life, practical terms, we can work to reduce or avoid exposures to the chemicals that can affect our health. Now, although there are exposures that are important to address all around us, in this class, I'm going to teach into two of them so that you can see how pervasive they are, why it's important to address them for yourself, and absolutely for all of your clients and patients. And we're going to be looking at phthalates and BPA. Now, phthalates are a plasticizer and a solvent, and they're used to fix and hold color and scent in products like personal care products, shampoos, lotions, candles, cleaning products, etc., and to make plastics soft and flexible. Not all types of plastics, but certain types of plastics. They're used in thousands of products around the home: shower curtains, nail polish, shampoo, makeup, pretty much all personal care products, household cleaners, scented candles, children's toys, garden hoses, like they're all around us. Go to your bathroom, pick up any of the products that are in there, shampoo, shaving cream, whatever, and turn over the label, and you'll see somewhere, usually near the bottom, the word fragrance. Now, this is a pretty good indication that phthalates are present in the product. Now, phthalates aren't part of the fragrance, meaning they're not one of the fragrance molecules. It doesn't add fragrance, but they're added to fragrance mixtures to ensure that the scent lingers for a long time. So when you see those commercials on TV for dryer sheets with fragrance release beads, and you can smell your dryer sheets for 3 weeks after you wash your clothes, that's phthalates that are doing that. Because of labeling laws, phthalates are not legally required to be listed on labels. So we have to instead look for the word fragrance. Sometimes it's written as perfume or parfum. That's a good indication that it's present. Like I said, they're why we can smell our laundry detergent weeks after we've washed our clothes. Phthalates are part of why we can smell shampoo on our hair hours after we've washed them, why we can smell perfume on our skin at the end of the day if we put it on in the morning. Phthalates are part of what are responsible for that. And these chemicals are ubiquitous. A 2014 study found metabolites of various types of phthalates in 89 to 98% of people tested. So that's pretty much all of us, right? Phthalates are linked to metabolic issues through more than one pathway. Phthalates have the ability to interfere with testosterone levels in both males and females. Phthalates specifically are a synthetic estrogen, so what's one of the ways that they can interfere there? Low testosterone in men has been associated with an increased prevalence of obesity, insulin resistance, and diabetes. And while this is a correlation and not a causation, it's still an important piece of the puzzle. Like many other endocrine disrupting chemicals, phthalates have been shown to alter normal thyroid function and hormone production that regulates weight and fat homeostasis. They also activate PPAR. that receptor that regulates fat. So this means that phthalates have the ability to act as obesogens through more than one pathway, which is why they're one of the first ones that I will address and encourage others to address with their audience. Now, it's worth noting that phthalates are not just linked to obesity. Low doses are linked to early onset puberty, increased risk of breast cancer, birth defects in developing boys, male infertility, thyroid disruption, and therefore female infertility, allergies, developmental disorders, and things like autism. Now, one thing that's important to mention is that even though the levels of phthalates or really any of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, whether they happen to be obesogens or not, is that what we are exposed to is really tiny, and that tiny doses do in fact matter. So before we shift into talking about BPA, I want to briefly talk about dosage, and I'm going to kind of zip through this because I want to be mindful of our time and make sure we have plenty of Q&A time. So a common line of thinking when looking at chemical exposures is to assume that small amounts that we're exposed to don't really matter. The assumption that small exposures equals little to no impact and that big exposures equals big impacts is known as the dose makes the poison argument. Now, the entire field of toxicology is built upon this idea that bigger doses equal big impacts, small doses equal small impacts or no impacts. And all of our regulatory decisions about chemicals in commerce are based on toxicology studies that follow the dose makes the poison logic. However, not all chemicals abide by this logic. It turns out that there are a number of chemicals that we encounter that actually behave in ways that fly into the face of conventional toxicology testing models and this dose makes the poison argument. So while the field of toxicology is firmly rooted in this belief that small doses don't matter as much as large doses, the fields of pharmacology and endocrinology are based on the fact that our bodies do respond to teeny tiny doses of chemicals, whether they're man-made or naturally occurring. So here's what I mean. Many prescription medications are delivered in doses that are similar to levels that we are exposed to environmental chemicals. So I'm going to give you guys an example, and we're going to use fluoride and the thyroid. So up until the 1960s or 70s, doctors in Europe prescribed fluoride to reduce the basal metabolic rate in people with hypothyroid or overactive thyroid. The fluoride would help suppress thyroid function. Fluoride levels as low as 0.5 to 0.1 micrograms or milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day, that's mg/kg day, was enough to suppress thyroid function. Now, if we take that dosage and apply it to a 70 kilogram or 154 pound adult, this dosage would be of 3.5 milligrams of fluoride per day to exert a therapeutic effect. For a child who weighs much less, a much smaller dose of fluoride would also suppress thyroid function. Now, when we look at levels of fluoride in our drinking water, whether it's intentionally added or naturally occurring, we can see that the levels that we're getting from drinking water are within the range that can actually suppress the thyroid. The EPA estimates that the average American adult is consuming nearly 3 milligrams of fluoride on a daily basis, and some are routinely ingesting 6 milligrams per day or more. So that's within that therapeutic range. So in addition, many pharmaceuticals are bioactive and indeed, as we know, have many negative side effects at levels that are similar to the kinds of levels that humans are exposed to endocrine disrupting and obesogenic chemicals. So this is why it's really important for us to pay attention to this. All right, let's scoot over to BPA. So BPA, and here's a slide, sorry, of a number of studies that are looking at the effects of low-dose exposures that we're all getting. So BPA, like phthalates, is an endocrine disrupting chemical. It's also a synthetic estrogen. It's found in hundreds of places, from clear hard plastics to the lining inside canned foods to cash register receipts and even dental sealants. It's one of the highest volume production chemicals worldwide. More than 10 million pounds are produced each year, and that was as of 2011, so it might actually be a little more by now. It too is measured in the vast majority of those tested. The most recent figure is 93% of people in the US tested have metabolites of bisphenol chemicals in their urine. That was from 2003, 2004 data, so I'm guessing that that figure is likely a little bit higher now. Bisphenols also seem to activate PPAR gamma. As I mentioned earlier, bisphenol A has been found to correlate in humans with altered levels of leptin and ghrelin, the hormones responsible for regulating hunger and satiety. A 2016 study in the journal Environmental Research and Public Health states BPA is a lipophilic molecule that accumulates in adipose tissue, where it interferes in the mechanisms of adipose tissue differentiation. They also state that for women with PCOS, low chronic exposure to BPA might initiate or exacerbate obesity and insulin resistance. In the 2003 to 2008 NHANES study, a direct correlation of urinary BPA levels of both BMI and waist circumference was found. And just like phthalates, they're under greater scrutiny for their potential role in increasing weight issues and metabolic disease. So think insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. But that's not all. It's like Oprah, everybody gets a disease here with BPA. BPA is also linked to heart disease, childhood asthma, breast cancer, prostate cancers, recurring miscarriages, early onset puberty, reduced sperm count, male birth defects, low birth weight, developmental and behavioral issues like ADHD, and recent studies have linked it to increases in hyperactivity and aggression, as well as anxiety and depression. Now, we all know that BPA-free is like this huge buzzword, and all kinds of products, plastic or otherwise, are slapping BPA-free labels on them in an attempt to capture the public's attention. So my guess is that some of you, maybe we could talk about this if you have questions on this afterwards, but most people that I know, even in the health space, have BPA-free plastic bottles. I've actually seen BPA-free labels on products that have been made of glass, which just reinforces the fact that people don't actually know what BPA is. It's akin to labeling orange juice as cholesterol-free. I'm not sure if y'all remember that, but for a while, Tropicana was labeling their orange juice as being cholesterol-free. Of course, there's no cholesterol in orange juice, but for people who are, quote, watching their cholesterol, they're going to pick that product over any of the other ones. So it's really just marketing buzzwords. BPA falls into that category, and sadly and frustratingly, most of the BPA-free products claims are total BS, and here's why. Bisphenol A, or BPA, is one member of a family of chemicals called bisphenols. When companies sought out replacement chemicals, mostly to appease their customer base who are, screaming and moaning about estrogens in their plastics, and they wanted to provide BPA-free plastics, they simply turned to the other chemicals in the same family, specifically bisphenol S and bisphenol F. So technically, yes, they're free of BPA, but most of the time they're just using these replacement chemicals. And this is a problem because research into these chemicals is finding that they're just as bad, if not worse, in terms of their potential health effects and levels of endocrine disruption. 2015 study on BPA and BPS in the journal Endocrinology stated that BPA-free plastic products are not necessarily safer than products containing BPA. And another study from the same year, published in the journal Environmental Health Perspectives, concluded that, quote, based on the current literature, BPS and BPF are as hormonally active as BPA, and they have endocrine disrupting effects. So our goal here is to reduce exposures to both BPA and phthalates, along with all of those other obesogenic chemicals, and that this is essential for us, whether we're dealing with a metabolic issue or not. Now, upon hearing all of this information about chemicals like phthalates and BPA, most people, including health professionals, will move to the idea of detoxing, either through a diet-based detox or a cleanse program, or maybe through a more aggressive protocol. So I just want to talk briefly about why those are not actually the first step in this process. And Shannon, I just want to check, I still have maybe another 5 to 7 minutes. Is that okay? I just want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A.
Yes, no, I think the information is great, and I think you're getting ready to answer the questions that most people have.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So first, diet detox and cleanse programs, they're extremely popular and for good reason. And I don't ever want to tell people not to be running them because they can be huge hugely valuable for people in their health journey and as practitioners, because they can really help to build a steady stream of clients for us. But most people, are dealing, as I said earlier, we all know this, with chronic health issues, doing everything they can to feel better. Diet detoxes and cleanses are great ways for people to reset healthy eating habits, cut back on sugar, all that good stuff. But when it comes to actually detoxing, and when we're talking about detoxing here, I am of course looking at it through the lens of toxins, and most of these programs actually miss the main point. So most of these diet detox or cleanse programs primarily focus on supporting the natural detox process, meaning pooping, peeing, drinking your water, drinking your cruciferous vegetables, and all the things that are going to support your liver. But most of them don't address the chronic exposure to toxins that can still lead to or contribute to poor health, including weight issues. So there's a little story that I like to tell that helps illustrate why detox or cleanse on its own isn't really the solution that we need. The story goes like this. Imagine it. You are in a rowboat, merrily rowing along, enjoying the calm of the river, the birds, and the trees. After a while, you notice that you're taking on water through a small hole in the bottom of your boat. At first, you don't really worry about it because, well, gee, the amount is so small and a little water never hurt anyone, right? So you just want to enjoy your ride. And you're not too worried because your boat comes equipped with a little bucket. So if you need to, you can empty some of that water out. An hour or two later, you see the water's risen quite a bit. It's actually up to the tops of your feet now. So you start getting a little concerned. You pick up that little bucket you've got and you start bailing out a bucket full here and a bucket full there. You continue down the river trying to enjoy your day and trying not to worry about the rising water. Eventually, water starts pouring in much faster and the water levels scary high. Panic sets in and you start tossing bucketfuls of water over the side of the boat. You are in crisis mode. The boat is quickly sinking and your arms are fatigued from the constant bailing. Eventually, overcome by exhaustion and more water than you or that bucket can deal with, your boat sinks and you drown. Or to translate that in less dramatic terms, you gain 40 pounds, or you develop thyroid disease, or you're infertile, or you develop cancer, i.e. you get sick. Now the boat in this story is us, it's our bodies, and that water flowing in are the toxins that we're exposed to every day, slowly building up inside of us. And that handy bucket that our vessel comes with, that's our natural detoxification process, supported by, of course, our diet-based detox, our cleanse program that we're doing. So sure, our body has its own detox system built in, but it's struggling to keep up with the flood of chemicals that we're exposing it to every day. So instead of constantly working to bail out your boat and possibly exhausting yourself in the process, it makes far more sense and is far more effective to start by plugging up the hole first. Now, in reality, if you think about it, if you were in a boat that was sinking, I guarantee that that would be your first course of action. Plug the dang hole. So this way, and every one of those bucketfuls of water that you chuck over the side, every detox or cleanse that you do, is going to have a greater positive impact on the water level in your boat. So love that story. Okay, so second, more aggressive detox protocols, including rapid weight loss, can actually make this problem worse. And this is an eye-opener for a number of people. So studies looking at the circulating levels of chemicals in the blood during periods of weight loss, especially fast weight loss, have found that those levels of chemicals actually increase. So here's an excerpt from the book Clean, Green, and Lead, Get Rid of the Toxins That Make You Fat by Dr. Walter Crinian, considered to be one of the foremost experts in the field of environmental medicine. If you don't have this book, please go out and get it. It is brilliant. He writes, when researchers measured the levels of chlorinated pesticides in adults who lost weight, either through a calorie-restricted diet or stomach stapling surgery, they found that the more weight people lost in the study lost, the higher the pesticide levels in their bodies became. Those who completed the 3-month calorie restriction program lost an average of 12% of their body weight, and the levels of pesticides in their blood increased by 24%. The circulating toxin level rose twice as much as the rate of weight loss. Pesticide levels also rise in the people who had the stapling procedure. 3 months after the surgery, they lost an average of 21% of their weight, accompanied by a 52% increase in circulating pesticides. By the 12th month follow-up test, the participants who'd had surgery had lost 46% of their pre-surgery weight, but their pesticide levels shot up by 388%. These studies show very clearly that just releasing toxins from the fat into the bloodstream isn't enough to get them to leave your body. So weight loss and detoxing are not the same thing. This doesn't mean that we don't lose weight. It just means that we need to do our best to reduce the amount of toxins that we're exposed to and proactively support the body's detoxification pathways, the liver through consumption of nutrient-dense foods, the kidneys through drinking enough water, the colon through the consumption of fiber-rich foods, the skin through sweating and things like dry brushing, the lymphatic system through regular movement, and the lungs really just by breathing. So detoxing is important, whether it's a diet detox or a more aggressive protocol. It's just not the first thing that we do. They are the right steps, they're just in the wrong sequence. Whoops, forgot to put that slide up. Okay, so Crinian outlines 5 essential steps to dealing with toxins. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. They are avoidance, 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 then supplementation, and lastly, cleansing and detoxification. And he's stressing the importance of avoidance behaviors because they are the most important step in addressing the toxins that we're exposed to. So once we plug the hole in the boat, any efforts that we make to bail it out will be more effective. So our aim as health professionals is to support our clients and patients in reducing their exposures to as many of these environmental chemicals as possible. Obviously, if they're dealing with weight issues, starting with obesogens. So here's an overview of the basic things to focus on. Reduce the consumption of conventionally grown foods and increase the consumption of organically grown foods. Eliminate plastic food storage containers and replace them with glass. And that's because the plastic food storage containers are a source of exposure to not only bisphenol chemicals in certain types of plastics, but all plastics leach some type of estrogenic compounds. Eliminate the use of synthetic fragrances and products that contain synthetic fragrances in the home. This includes personal care products, household cleaners, candles, air fresheners, etc. Filter our drinking water. Remember that atrazine and obesogen was found in approximately 90% of drinking water samples tested. And obviously things like, encourage smoking cessation, as that also is an obesogen. So these actions should be encouraged for everyone, even if they don't have a chronic issue with weight, as exposure to these chemicals can likely trigger it. And they're not the only toxins that we should be concerned about. So as I mentioned earlier, there's only about 20 chemicals or compounds identified as obesogens, yet there are tens of thousands of chemicals used in commerce, hundreds of which are showing up in our bodies. And as health professionals, our goal is to help clients, patients, and our audience identify and dial down exposures in as many ways as possible. So consumers and clients are often very aware of toxins, even if it's superficially. News headlines are coming out about this all the time, but they don't actually have anybody to talk to about this stuff. And that's also why I feel from a business standpoint, it is very wise for health professionals like lifestyle practitioners to be that resource for their clients. So I hope that this conversation has given you a little bit of a new appreciation, not only for our constant battle with weight issues, but for how important it is for us to all be addressing environmental health issues. Toxins don't just make us fat, they can give us cancer, they can cause a flare-up in our autoimmune conditions, they can trigger allergies, or leave us struggling to conceive. So regardless of where you are in your work or who you serve, toxins are an important piece of the conversation. If this is a conversation that you want to dive deeper into with me and you want to explore further, I want to encourage you to check out my flagship course. This is an introductory level course. It's a self-paced, people usually complete it in 2 or 3 weeks, called Tools for Teaching Toxicity. I've had about 2,300 students go through that course in the last few years. This is focused on helping you to understand what are the most common, most important, easiest to address exposures. This is a $197 course, it's like a low entry point, no brainer. And I've actually set up a 25% off promo code for everybody, and they can use NANP18. And the URL for that course is teachingtoxicity.com. So that's just a thank you for being here. This course is really designed to increase your understanding and fluency around this conversation, starting with what are the most critical, what I consider non-negotiable topics to address with clients. And I also want to mention, I've got another class coming up in May. That's a more advanced class, sort of a mid-level class. And then each fall, I run my advanced certificate course in environmental health. And this actually has 30 CEUs through NANP, which I'm thrilled about because I believe that that actually covers your annual requirement. And this is a 5-month course that marries together an education in environmental health and business integration. So really helps you to marry these two together. So you guys can go check those out. You can find me, here's my website, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. And let's move over to questions. I am happy to field any questions that you guys have.
Oh, Laura, that was fantastic. It was a great topic. We don't have a whole lot of questions right now. We've got more comments, which
comments are great too.
Yeah, comments are great. You know, this gal is saying, we're getting no problem us storing our foods and preparing foods with glass, but we've got products that are coming to us in packaged plastic and styrofoam trays, and grass-fed organic products that are being packaged in ways that aren't in alignment. Do you have any suggestions? Or do we?
Yeah, and that's so I'll start by saying this. My sort of tagline or motto in this whole conversation is, let's change the things we can so we worry less about the things that we can't, essentially. And so, I can tell you that my shopping habits have certainly shifted. So, for example, I don't buy sauerkraut in plastic jars. I'll make sure I choose the one that's packed in glass. When it comes to access to things like, whether it's organic grass-fed beef that's stored on a styrofoam tray, I think that's where, as consumers, we really need to make our voices heard, and we phone call the company and we tag them on social media and we get them to start shifting the way that they're packaging their food. There is a lot of research into the quote safety of food contact materials, and whether that's contact materials that are used during manufacturing, like the tubing that's used to pipe milk from a big vat into bottles or packages or whatever, to canned foods and plastic wraps and things like that. So some of it is we do the best that we can, and in places where we don't really have a lot of choice as consumers and where we feel frustrated, we channel that frustration into action. We call the company, we email the company, we tag them on social media, we do all the things.
Yeah.
And that's how we make change.
Yeah, you're 100%. We have, as consumers, have a choice every time we open up our pocketbooks. And interestingly, I just saw something where, styrofoam cups that they're using to put coffee on are now being phased out. Restaurants are no longer provide. You have to ask for a straw because they're so dangerous to our environment. So they're hearing us. And this information is not new. The information is not new, but it's finally being given the
heard.
Respect. Yeah. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I was just going to say, unfortunately, it usually takes some crisis of some kind before our attention is turned. And I think in this era, and there have been environmental crises for as long as we've been paying attention to them, going back as early as the turn of the last century, in our current era, it's Flint, Michigan. Yeah. Right. That's been the big siren call to pay attention, and people are finding lead in their drinking water all over the country, not just in Flint. And so then it starts get, turning into bigger questions about like, what else should I be worried about? If it's not just lead, it's other chemicals, it's arsenic, it's atrazine, it's all these other chemicals in the water and in other sources. So
right.
We have to find the silver lining in those bad situations.
Yeah.
And the silver lining is awareness.
Yep, this program that you offer is great tool for our kit, and we really appreciate you coming and joining us today. Thank you for supporting NANP, our community.
You are very welcome. I'm happy to share with you guys.
All right, you have a great day, Laura, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I just want to let you know to mark your calendars for next month, Thursday, March, what are we doing? March 18th, I believe. No, March, the second Thursday, we will have Cheryl Burdett, who is a naturopathic doctor, and she's going to be talking about the triad of gut destructions, markers of leaky gut and food sensitivities. So that will be a great presentation, talking about how the body reacts to food in other ways other than IgE and IgG. So mark your calendars and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.